Welcome back to Gun Tilt Minnesotan. Today I have another optic sent out to the channel by Discovery Optics. This is their HD Gen 2 5 to 30 by 56 SFIR. A couple of the specs: the magnification range is 5 to 30x, which is a 6 times range. The objective diameter is 56 millimeters. The tube diameter is 34. The length is 15 inches. The weight is 38.1 ounces. Very solid, beefy optic. The reticle is the SS FFP IR mill. It's mill reticle, mill configuration turrets as well. First focal plane, the Illumination, has 6 positions with off in between, and it is red color. It has a side parallax that goes from 25 yards up to infinity, and the field of view is 23 feet down to 3.4 feet. Eye relief is 3.5 inches to 3.4 inches, somewhere in there. It does have a 0 stop. There's no revolution indicator, but it does have 33 mils of internal travel for elevation, 17 for windage. Fully multi-coated lenses, nitrogen-filled, shockproof, waterproof, and fog-proof. All right, I have a 6-inch target down there at 330 yards, and it is way too windy to be shooting rimfire. My data is 14.7. Should be anyways. We'll see. It's pretty hot out. And that wind is going to throw it around, but a 6-inch target, that's only a 2 MOA target, guys. That's relatively small for rimfire, especially at long range. So we'll see how the Discovery does. The HD Gen 2 5 to 30 by 56. Here we go. Little high. All right. There's an impact. Hopefully you can hear that. There's an impact. So it looks like I need to come down about 2/10. Impact. Just off the right edge. Impact. Impact. Just off the right edge. Hey, that's not too bad for a warm-up. 330 yards with a roughly 2 MOA size target. And I can see the hits on there really nice and clearly. Moving on to the features, it does come with scope covers, and here is the cap cover kind of deal here they send with the front. It's like a rubberized plastic. It does cover the lens well, but don't lose it. And then there's a 56 millimeter flip up cap in the front, and it works decently. Doesn't seem like, it's gonna just break or chip out. Some of these are just really thin up here, but this one's not really thin. It looks like it's a decent build, and it's going to hold up to many flips, I hope. Moving on to the reticle focus, or the ocular focus here. There's plenty of range of travel. I can move that all the way out. I did have a friend shoot this a little while ago, and he was just fine, even though our eyes are different. I usually run mine to the right, and the way that you set an ocular focus or reticle focus is by looking at a clear blue sky or a blank wall just for a moment, each time peeking back while you twist it a little bit more at a time to figure out if the reticle is getting more clear or fuzzy. I had a friend a while ago at the range who was thinking this made the image more clear or fuzzy. That's not what this does. This is for the reticle alone, and you just take a peek at it. You don't want to stare at it because your eye has memory and muscles, and it'll try to focus that image if you stare at it, and you won't realize that you're fatiguing your eye each time you look at the reticle. So what you want is for this mechanical device to do the focusing for you, set it and forget it kind of thing. And then hopefully if you do have it backed off a little bit, maybe just make a mark on the tube and then also on the ring so you don't lose your place if you borrow it to a friend and they need to adjust it a little bit more or differently than what you're used to. I run mine all the way to the right because of the way my eye works, and it works fine for me. I'm happy with that. The quick adjust feature is not mandatory, but it is nice, and a lot of people seem to like that feature. There's enough texture on there to grab it, and it moves freely and smoothly with no grit. All right, moving on to the magnification ring. Now this is a 5 to 30, and I would say it's a smooth, and smooth just means not gritty. It's not a gritty ring. It's nice and tight. It doesn't have a bunch of loose or sloppy machining done here. It's decent, but it is firm, and that's one thing I noticed is there's usually a dial on these types of scopes that's going to be a little bit on the firm side, and the magnification ring is a little firm. Probably could benefit from having a cattail of some sort or a mag assist lever. Maybe that's something that could be added in the future right there. That'd be nice. I tend to shoot this optic a lot of times on either 10 power or 16 power. Now, just a little bit ago, I was shooting, I think, right around there, around 16 power, but you certainly can shoot it at higher magnification without, severe issue unless you have Mirage. And today I have lots of Mirage, so I just backed it off a little bit, but the glass can handle it. And the ring itself, it's quite a range of travel to go all the way to over 30 like that. I don't think you're going to be doing it fast, but there is enough grip on here that I can grab a hold of it and move it to where I need it to be. In a competition, I'd probably just plan on setting it right around there, right around 12, and leaving it at 12 for the competition, so I don't have to mess around. There's plenty of field of view at 10 or 12 power. Can see the reticle well enough, and then I don't have to try to fight the mag ring, because that could distort my image a little bit, kind of move the rifle back and forth, make it unlevel in a competition. But it does give you the option of 5 to 30 power, which is quite a huge range, and it's nice that the glass can handle that. Onto the illumination knob on the exterior here, you have 6 levels with off in between. It's very tactile. It's very easy to get the battery out here. Just runs on a standard 2032. Very smooth. I like the tactile feel of that. I would say this is an improvement over the Gen 1 in both the feel and also aesthetics of the optic as a whole. I think there are some improvements, including the finish. It does seem to have a better finish. The illumination is good for evening and early morning. It's gonna probably, it's gonna be a little too dull for really bright light, but that's okay for me, because I mostly care about that in LPVOs or red dots, or maybe in a prism optic, but not so much in a high magnification optic. I don't need that to be just bleeding red all over. And speaking of bleeding, it really doesn't bleed out of the reticle. There's a proper part of the reticle itself that is illuminated for dusk or early morning shooting, hunting, that sort of thing, if you like to hunt with a 5 to 30. All right, let's move on to the Parallax wheel. The Parallax wheel is pretty smooth. I would say it's a good feel overall. Goes down to 25 yards. Now I'm going to speak to that really quickly. This is a 5 to 30, and if you're shooting closer than 25 yards, it's like NRL 22, the closest distances you'll shoot. But if you're shooting closer than that on varmints or critters, targets maybe, air guns, one thing you can do to help with the parallax error is actually bring the magnification down. Don't be shooting on really high power if you're shooting closer than 25 yards, because parallax actually matters closer than it does further. You're going to notice it more, at least. And one thing you can do to mitigate that or alleviate some of that issue is just don't shoot on really high power. So if I'm going to shoot closer than 25 yards, even though it only has a 25-yard parallax setting, I can just bring the magnification down to like 8 or 7, right in there. I can still see the reticle decently at that power, and it helps mitigate any parallax error that I was going to have or perceived issues. The wheel is large. It's got a good texture to it. It's not firm the way that the magnification ring is firm, but it's just smooth in general and requires, I would say, an appropriate amount of resistance. The numbers you have go from 25, 50, 100, 200, and then 500, and then it kind of just jumps right up to infinity. So there's not a lot of difference between 500 and infinity. If you were going to do a primary amount of your shooting from 500 to infinity or 1,000 or just further distances, I would say This kind of optic is a little bit more calibrated for slightly closer shooting with high magnification, such as the rimfire that it's on right now, although you can do it, and absolutely I've taken some looks through the glass beyond 500 yards with it, and I can fine tune it. It's just a very small range right there to go between 500 and infinity. There's not a lot there. I do find the numbers to generally line up, which is interesting. A lot of optics companies are moving away from having numbers at all, but these do line up, and it is a true 25-yard parallax. That's an important thing to talk about. A lot of optics that advertise 25-yard parallax, when you actually get to 25 yards, there's still just a slightly out of touch image, and that's bothersome to me. In fact, the Gen 1 version of this optic, I found that many character models, although it said 25-yard parallax, I don't feel that it was a true 25-yard parallax. I think a lot of the character models or individual models that I had witnessed were more like a 30-yard parallax, maybe even a slight bit further, 33-yard parallax. And that's just a little annoying, especially if you're shooting air guns or something close where, again, parallax matters more closer. It's nice to see in this updated Gen 2 version that the 25-yard parallax is a true 25-yard parallax. That's why it's on my NRL-22 gun. It gives me high magnification and the minimum parallax I need for those 1/4 inch targets at 25 yards on the KYL, but I can also shoot it beyond 500 yards. I like to run pretty far with my 22s, and this is a nice smooth wheel. It's a big one, so it's easy to grab onto. If you're gonna run a bubble level, I actually have one down in the base here on an area 419 Picatinny rail. But if you're going to run one, that's one thing to consider, is that this can get in the way. So you might want to run your bubble level up here a little closer, or just a larger one that sticks out further up here to be above the parallax wheel and not run interference. Maybe even the electronic bubble level from MDT. All right, let's talk about the turrets. Now, they are large, oversized dials. There's 33 mils of internal travel on the elevation, and the windage is good. Windage feels just like the elevation. I'm going to talk about the elevation primarily here. It does have a zero stop instead of a return to zero, and that is a big improvement over some other types and models. I've tried optics like this, including the Gen 1, which was more of a return to zero, which is just a threaded dial that you spin down and then it holds your place, and it's an effective idea, but it's not quite as precise as this zero stop. And I set my zero stop with like 3 or 4 tenths under, so that's the hard stop right there. And I'm sure you can't hear it because I'm speaking in a microphone, but it's a nice hard audible stop right there. And on my 22s, I like to run a few mils under just for hot weather or closer stages, like I said. And they are very tactile. So the zero stop is great. The clicks themselves, very tactile. Generally lines up with a witness mark for the most part. Otherwise, you could count clicks if you're really concerned about that, but it pretty much lines up. I know where it's at. And I have, with a 50 MOA base of usable internal travel, I believe I have 27 mils. There's 27.2. I try not to push it much further than that. So really shooting at 330 yards today, which is what I was doing, is really just centering up the glass. It's really getting it closer to the median area there, and it looks very good. If you're not going to shoot extended ranges with these types of optics, it's better to go with a less MOA base and just let the elevation travel reside, somewhere towards the middle, and so you're not using the extremes of the travel. I think 27 is admirable. 27 with a 50 MOA base, again, is really good. If you needed more for whatever reason, you could put a steeper base on there or a pair of infinity rings from FX and get that full about 33 mils of travel. I find in most optics, especially at this price point, this class, that the tracking itself and return to zero is pretty good. It's not ever perfect. Every scope that's ever been created has some amount of error. There's going to be a little bit of tracking error, a little bit of return to zero error, because it's a mechanical device and they're just not perfect. But they're really close. And actually, guys, with this model that I have right here, it's hard to tell how much error there even is. I think it might be pretty good. And that's an impressive thing. This Gen 2 version has both the aesthetic and the feel, the glass quality, but the turrets are just fantastic. As far as my data goes, so far out to 530 yards, I can't tell a difference at all between any other scope, and I mean $2,000 scopes that I've run out at this distance. I don't see any tracking difference because I have the exact same data and the same temperature. That's usually the big deal with 22. Same data with the same temperature at the same distance. And so I'm going to go ahead and say that's definitely a pass for the tracking. And return to zero, I believe it's pretty good. It's hard to say with 22s because you always have a little bit, like maybe a tenth here or there. I did think that there was a little bit of a skip in the windage. I don't think the windage was perfect in that, but that's okay with me because I don't use the windage for anything other than setting the zero stop or really windy days, which is just rare. And again, you can track what the error would be and you can calibrate for that. You can fix that in your equations. I'm more concerned about elevation trueness, and I found it to be very true out to, let's see, that was 33 mils of travel at 530 yards. I did use 30 here and then I held over 3. That's how I ran that, and it was true. So I'm happy with that, happy with the image, and the return to zero, like I said, I believe is accurate. All right, looking at the eye relief. This is an important thing. It's kind of an addition to the conversation for me. I haven't in the past said much about eye relief, but people do ask more and more about it, and I'm more than happy to give you my input. I'm not an optics expert, but I do have opinions, and I have looked through a lot of optics, especially in the last 2 years. I've been looking through a lot of optics, a lot of glass, and I'm going to compare it against kind of, the price point, but then some more expensive optics as well. So let's start off on 30 power, okay, max power. Yes, the eye box is a little bit more touchy. Is it a lot more touchy? It's considerably more touchy. But I noticed something. If I even back it off to about, let's see. Let me just take a look here, make sure I'm accurate. If I back it off to about, when I'm on 22 power, it seems really forgiving. This eye box actually, over the Gen 1 model, I would say is considerably better. And I'm happy with it. I'm not dissatisfied with it, even on 30 power, because on 30 power, I'm not going to be running around doing gun game stuff, guys. I'm not shooting NRL 22 matches on 30 power, and I don't know anybody who is, unless you're in the prone on a KYL rack or something, and even then, most people are not shooting on 30 power. I'm going to say the sensitivity to the eye box is not bad. I feel like face placement is a little bit more comfortable than I expected, and it's certainly an improvement on the Gen 1 model from what I remember. It's not bad. And like I said, if I turn it down just a little bit, certainly by the time I get to 16 power, so I'm right about 16 power there, it's great. Eye relief is great. Head position is not all that important. Image looks pretty good in the center of the glass. Yeah, and I'm out a little ways. Normally on this particular stock, on a lot of optics, I'm running it right about here. And the scope is forward just a little bit. But I would say with this one, it has a little better eye relief than I expected. It's just not really all that sensitive. I don't see a bunch of what is properly called tunneling. I don't see a bunch of tunneling error. Nope. Looks pretty good. As far as fishbowl effect, just kind of that weird shape that you get. It's not a perfect circle. There's a little bit at 5 power. That's true. Yeah, there's a little bit there. And remember, I'm on a 50 MOA rail. That's quite an inclination rail compared to what most people are going to run. And so that changes a little bit with where I'm at in the dialing structure or the elevation turret. But if I just go to, even right there, even 9 power, it really reduces any fishbowl effect. And it looks pretty darn good. When I get closer to that, like 28, it's still not fishbowling. It's mostly low end. And in my opinion, on a scope like this, it probably makes sense for the clientele, the people who are going to be purchasing this, it probably makes sense to do really well on the higher end And if you had to sacrifice anything, the lower end being just a little bit of a fishbowl is pretty okay. Most people are not using the extreme low or the extreme high. They're using the center section. But when you use the extreme low is when you need field of view or you're shooting extremely close. I can still make out the reticle on 5 power. And just barely that center dot. I'm at 330 yards. Just barely. I mean, it's a very small reticle, and I'm using it against a white target, so that's pretty tricky. If I just move it up to 8 power, there we go. So just 3 more power, and I can see really well. I'm actually pretty happy with the image that I'm getting. I'm pretty happy with the reticle as well. The reticle, I suppose I can talk about that for a second. You know, it's got 10 mils of holdover, and if I just bump it up here, let's see. With the reticle at the bottom of the scope there, you know, you got 10 mils of holdover, and in the very last tenth of a mil, or the last mil of the 10, there's a breakup with hashes, and that you can use for milling or ranging, and that will give you your 10 tenths of a mil. And it's a pretty useful feature. I actually like that. I prefer that in every mil-radian based reticle. I want to have those tenths of a mil, so if I miss the target and I see my spot in the dirt and where it should have been on the steel, I can measure it in tenths of a mil and get a really, really close, precise measurement, especially if I'm sitting in the prone and I'm comfortable. Underneath that, there's another about a mil distance, and there's a chevron kind of thing, a pinnacle, with 2 bars down, something you've probably seen before. So technically you could get like about 11 mils out of that if you use the pinnacle there. And I'm on, again, about 14 power. So on 14 power, I can see the whole reticle. I can see all the windage marks. I can see all the lateral lines, which go technically out to 10 mils as well. There's 8 numbered for windage, and then there's a 9th line. And then there's also the chevron there, which actually ends up being the 10th. So it's a little bit different. The horizontal lines and the vertical lines, the calibration and the way that works in the mil-based scale there, it's just going to look a little different because you have 8 markers, and then there's a 9th with no marker, and then the 10th is the pinnacle. But on the vertical axis here, on the vertical you have 10 lines of holdover, which is good. And then the pinnacle or the chevron at the bottom there is actually your 11th mil. So just a little bit different, sort of unique, but it works. It's not a problem, and I don't have issues with it. I do like it. As far as hold under, you do have 8 mils of hold under, and it's got some different breakups there too. Just a little bit unique. I would say as far as hold under is a great place to put your 10 tenths of a mil for milling or ranging. Measuring, that's a nice place to put it. This one has it at the bottom of the reticle, which is just fine too. This has kind of a different breakup at the very top of the reticle, but if you needed to hold under, or you like to do your ranging with the hold under portion, the top of your reticle, there's a little something there that you could work with as well. The dot itself is a smaller size dot and is pretty much the size of a bullet impact on steel at 330 yards here, and so I can still use it for shooting really, really small, tiny targets, varmints, that kind of thing. But it might be a little bit hard to pick up on a steel, maybe at a competition that's been shot all day, if you're shooting on lower power, like let's say 8 power. Might be harder to pick up. Now, as far as glass clarity goes, this is, you know, they're calling it an HD Gen 2. So it's a little bit different than the EDPRS that they came out with recently. If I had to compare the two, it could be because it's lower power as well, but it appears to me that the new EDPRS, that one is probably a little bit better with color. It's probably a little bit better with chromatic aberration. It's probably a little bit clearer image. I think the contrast is better. I think the color is a little bit better. So I've gone back and forth between the two, and it just seems like their newer model might be a touch better, but it's not much. It's almost indiscernible unless you're looking for it, if that makes sense. When I look for it, it sure seems like it, by a little bit, but this is not bad. And now I'm actually going to compare this against the price point and then also the Gen 1 model here. So when I look through it, man, the Gen 1 model was not bad for glass. It wasn't terrible for the price point, you know, considering what they were aiming for, the market that they're going after. I think it made sense for that market. And the price that these are coming in at, you know, it's a pretty decent piece of glass. You are going to get some chromatic aberration. I've got a little mirage today, so I'm not going to comment on it too much because that's distorting some of my image. But on days where, you know, it was like sundown or it was rainy out and I was just trying to pick up some of that image, I would say color-wise, it's not quite as bright as some others, but it probably is a little cheaper than the things I'm comparing it to. If I compare it against like $600-700 optics, yeah, I could see a little bit of a color difference, a contrast difference. What do you call it? Depth of focus or depth of field. There's a little something there too. But when I compare it against this price point, I feel like this is probably better. I think they've done the scope better. That's my opinion about it. I think it is an improvement over the Gen 1 in a lot of ways. And the competition in this price point, I just think it's better. The scope as a whole, I think, is better, actually. And I know that'll probably start somebody's head on fire out there who's listening. In particular, I know one person who might not agree with me, but that's my unbiased opinion. I do get these optics sent out to the channel by Discovery, but they are pretty honorable in the way that they ask for 100% feedback. They are not looking for me to pet their ego or stroke their ego. They just want to know, did we do a good job? And they may not be able to shoot the way that we are because of their location in the world, but they are producing an optic that is basically designed by user feedback. And this is a result of user feedback, is improving the turrets and changing some of the aesthetic a little bit. Probably going to see more stuff like that in the future. That's user feedback produced, you know, optics. Let's go ahead and shoot it a little bit here. I'm sorry guys if the audio isn't perfect. It's very, very windy today. Let's see, I'm shooting a 1/2-inch piece of steel. You're probably not going to hear it, but I can at least see it. Okay, a little left. There it is. There it is. There it is. That's not a challenge. Let's go a little smaller steel. I'm going to shoot a 2/3 size IPSC. Right on. Just not a challenge. Yeah, that's too easy. Let's go to, let's see, I have a 6-inch target here. That's 2 MOA. Ooh. There it is. All right. I think that was 10. Not too bad. I do really enjoy shooting this optic. I think it's a pretty good image, and especially on days like today when the light is great, looks wonderful. A couple more things about the package and everything you're going to get. It ships in a really nice package, and it does come with a 3-inch sunshade as well as rings. It's not the rings that you're seeing here. Those are from Sunway Photo. I have a partnership with Sunway Photo, and I just really like their rings, so those are the ones that I choose on my personal rifles. But it pairs nicely with this optic, and the rings that it comes with are very functional. I don't have a lot of problems with them. I just prefer the Sunway Photo rings for my personal use. Now, who is this optic designed for? Who are they marketing towards with this? And I thought about this a little bit, and I would say generally this seems to be aimed towards maybe like your varmint shooters, airgun shooters, NRL 22 base class guys, maybe target shooters for longer range or medium range shooting. I could see it in that application here. People who want, you know, kind of the features of some of the modern, more expensive rifles, but you don't need a $2,000 optic with shot glass in it. You can deal with the HD glass, and I think this probably fits a lot of people in the market right now for one of their rifles. That's one of the dangerous things about this brand, is they are bringing an optic to market that has a lot of the features, and it competes really well against optics that are doing a similar job, but they're asking $300 or $400 more, to be honest with you. And so I'm pretty happy with the performance of the optic, very happy with the reticle, the turrets, and this redesign. I'm telling you, the Gen 2 is definitely a jump up from the Gen 1. I didn't think the Gen 1 was a bad scope, but comparatively, there really is no comparison. The turrets on this are they're just way more tactile. They do track much truer, not just the windage and elevation, but the parallax setting. I mean, the parallax setting on the Gen 1, I did have some issues with that one. And so this Gen 2, it's nice to see that cleaned up. It's a true 25-yard parallax. If I was going to give them just a little critique, it would be maybe find a way to smooth out the magnification ring. And I shouldn't say smooth out, because it is smooth. It's not gritty, it's not sloppy, but maybe just reduce the weight that it takes, or the amount of force it takes to move the ring, from like 5 power to 30 power. There's quite a bit of force going into that, and it would just be nice if it could be a little bit lighter tension on that. But other than that, I don't have a lot of critique for it. I think you get a lot with this optic in the package, pretty much plug and play. As soon as you get it zeroed, it's ready to go. And I don't think there's a lot of competition for a 5 to 30 at this price point. That would be my opinion about that. I know there are some 5 to 25s as recently reviewed. In fact, the 5 to 25 PRS from Discovery is a very, very good scope. If you're a little bit more towards the gun game thing and you're okay with that budget of the Discovery 5 to 25 PRS, take a look at that one. I think that's a very good scope. It is a different scope than the one you're looking at here. I think the glass is a little different and the reticle is a little different, but it was a very good scope. I was happy with that. I will tell you though, I'm going to run this one in some NRL 22 competitions. I'm going to do some light varminting with it, as well as target practice at extended ranges. I'm going to keep running it through its courses here and its paces on the channel. You'll see it on another rifle, probably a centerfire rifle soon enough, more than likely a centerfire rifle. And I'm going to run it out past maybe 500-600 yards and just take a look at low light conditions, early morning conditions perhaps too, for the lighting, and get a feel for it and make sure that it is robust. But so far it seems like it's built very well. It absolutely is an increase in quality, in aesthetic, and also function over the Gen 1. So if that's your main point that you want to know about, yes, it's an increase. Yes, it's worth the money, and it's not asking a lot of you. I think it's a very affordable optic. And if you just have a 22 or an air gun sitting around, I think this would be a really, really good option for either of those, especially if you're into target practice or varminting. Now, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of shooting at 330 yards just to show you that this is a really good fit. And I'm only using about 15 mils of elevation to get out to 330 yards. There's a lot more in there, and I plan on putting that to the test in the future. So stay tuned for the next video, guys. Thanks, like, share, and subscribe. Impact. 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 Oh, just off the left edge. Well, performance isn't terrible considering there is an 8 to 10 mile an hour wind right now, and in the gusts, I don't know what it is in the gusts, but it's been around 8 to 10. For a 22 bullet, that's really not too bad, and the image is really looking good. It's nice and sunny out, so that makes sense, but detail-wise, looks pretty nice. I'm only up 14.5 right now mils, so I'm not running it to its extreme, but even at 14.5 mils on this 50 MOA base, I'm really just bringing it up more towards the center of the glass, or center of the range of travel in the glass. All right, wind's changing up a little bit. Now I'm impacting left. That's fun. Impact. Just low. Impact. 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 Lance. Miss. Impact. Oh, it's moving. That must have been a hit. Didn't quite hear that one. That's really not too bad of a ratio in wind like this. This ammo does pretty decent.